Okay, welcome to the Jazz Ranch, hip cats, groovy chicks. You know, the alter dominant man wanted to be here, but he had to go down to Newark to meet his girlfriend for a convention of alter egos down there. And, you know, he had to take the alternate route. Not to make a pun, but at any rate, he wasn't here for what I call altered scales or chromatic alterations. You know, I'm going to be playing the song for you called Getting Sentimental Over You. I'm going to use some alterations there in the original chords using chromatic 2/5. So it has a lot to do with chromatic alterations. In other words, chromatic being just half steps, either ascending or descending half steps. So here we go with a great song. I'm going to play the song for you first, and then I'm going to talk about chromatic alterations and how jazz musicians use this in their playing spontaneously and in improvisation. So here we go with a great song called Getting Sentimental Over You. Here we go. Okay, welcome to the Jazz Studio at the Jazz Ranch. Now, I'm going to talk about chromatic alteration and how I applied it to this song, Getting Sentimental Over You. Now, the original chords that I played on as written in the score, here you see it, F major 7, we're in the key of F, down in half steps, E7, E flat. You can make that a 13 if you like. E flat 7, 13 to D7, and then to the 2 chord in dominant 5 chord, and go to the 1 there or the 3 chord. Now, we're moving down in half steps, but instead of them just being dominant chords, I'm going to create 2 5s. So I'm going to play on the solo, I'm going to improvise on the 2 chord that precedes the 5. In other words, it's related to. So 2 of E7, E7 would be relating to A, be 5 of A, so its 2 chord would be B minor 7. So it'd be F major 7 to B minor 7 to E7, then down a half step to B flat minor 7 to E flat 7, down a half step to A minor 7. So we're doing 2 5s now, descending in half steps. B minor, E7, B flat minor 7, E flat 7, A minor 7, D7. Now here would go to G7 normally, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to alter it and continue the process of the 2 5s that are moving in step, half step chromatically. So I'm going to go to A flat minor 7 to D flat 7, and then to G minor 7 to C7. You see how that changes the original chord progression, and it allows me to go in half steps, so I can play all those scales now. You see, it's more interesting and challenging for a jazz musician, and we do this off the cuff. In other words, we don't plan it ahead, we don't write the score out that way, we just do it. Now, you might write it out, but you don't need to. You know, if the musicians you're playing with are hip to this, then they'll go with you. So that's the first example. The alteration becomes that A minor 7, D flat 7, half step above the 2 5, you see. So that D flat 7 is like acting as a tritone substitute to the C7. You get that chromatic movement there. Now, this is used a lot in other songs as well, other standard tunes. I used this on a video I did on Like Someone in Love. Right here, 2 chord, D minor 7, G7, right, to 1 chord. I used a half step above the G7. A flat minor 7 to D flat 7 tritone substitute to the C7. See, that's an interesting sound now, right? It's kind of a lift. It gives you a little bit of a lift, and it's interesting. It's creative. It's imaginative. You know. See. I can play on more notes off the G7 scale than I would have if I just stayed on G7. It's very similar in a lot of ways because you can play similar scales that you would play on the G7 altered scales, but you have that bass note in there that you wouldn't have had if you just played a G. You know. So now I also did the same thing on the third example I'm going to give you on Easy to Love. It was like G7, right? D minor. Let's see, D minor, A7, D minor, G7. I went A flat minor. Same type of thing. Here, 3 chord to 6 dominant to 2. Instead of just going 6 dominant to 2, I go chromatic again. 6, and it's dominant, down a half step, that's 3. 6, down a half step. What does that do? Allows me to play on another scale. So I can go. Another thing that jazz musicians like to do is to alter the scales they're going to play on to have more possibilities and be more creative, more imaginative. So those chromatic moves, and we use them in simple things like just the blues, playing a blues. Say we're playing a blues in C7. Go up a half step. Now, or down a half step. How about? You see how that chromatic alteration is very much a part of the jazz sound. You know, that's all C chord. Up a half step, down a whole step, up a half step, back to C. You see, all that can be played on a blues. So chromatic alteration is a jazz thing, and you'll hear that if you listen to recordings, and I'm trying to hip you to it. So we'll sign off now. Signing off from the Jazz Ranch. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please write to me. I love to hear from you. I always answer all comments if you give me enough time. It might take me a month or two, but you will hear from me. And I think that's important because I really do appreciate your comments, and I respect the fact that you take the time to write to me. So I'll sign off with the great words of my friend Hermie Dressel. Whenever I left his office, he always said this to me: swing loose. And we'll see you next time around. Bye-bye.